Hi, I'm Karlin Borisenko. In early 2020, I was the knitting Democrat who accidentally went viral on the internet for going to a Trump rally and then left the party. I became the conservative darling, was on all the shows, traveled around the country, and then realized that conservatives were no better than Democrats. If there's one thing that I've learned, it's that both political tribes are two sides of the same coin. But it wasn't all bad. On my journey, I became obsessed with understanding the woke ideology and the culture war. I broke the story of the city of Seattle doing segregated training with its employees.
How bad has this stuff become? The city of Seattle has now put out, I'm not kidding you, this is according to Dr. Karlin Borisenko, who's an organizational psychologist. The city of Seattle asked its white employees to voluntarily spend a day off in a training about their internalized racial superiority.
I broke the story that led to the first ever federal lawsuit against critical race theory in the schools. I broke the Coke Be Less White story, one of the biggest anti-woke stories of all time. It got over 30 million views. Coca-Cola's corporate headquarters even had to change their outgoing voicemail.
Throughout the past few days, you may have seen inaccurate reporting on the content of our recently launched diversity, equity, and inclusion training program.
I exposed the schools in Burlington, Vermont for grooming middle school children live on the internet. They called me an unwoke cult leader for that. And the Vermont Human Rights Commission slandered me publicly as being a hate channel. I even got called a hero in Breitbart for exposing that the Washington Post was writing a hit piece on Christopher Rufo. I have broken story after story after story about what's going on in the public schools, from Cambridge, Massachusetts, to autistic sex education, to the Department of Education in Michigan, literally training teachers all over the state how to groom children. I wrote a book called Actively Unwoke, the ultimate guide for fighting back against the woke insanity in your life. I host a podcast all about fighting back, and I'm downloading all of my knowledge to you on my Substack, karlin.substack.com. The world is a crazy place. We are literally surrounded by cults on all sides. On this show, we're going to do a deep dive into all aspects of the culture war, and I will show you the dark, dystopian underbellies on both sides. Here are the commitments I'll make to you. I will always tell you the truth. I will always bring you receipts. And if you stick with me, I promise you will see the world differently. Welcome to the cult. Please mount that like button for me and subscribe if you feel so inclined. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the cult, where we talk about all aspects of the culture war. And what could we possibly talk about today that is not Israel and Palestine? And I got to tell you guys, the reason that I took yesterday off was because I was just really, really kind of sick to my stomach. I mean, like physically sick to my stomach about the entire situation in the Middle East. I kind of started the weekend not really caring, and that might sound heartless to some people. But the way I see it, bad things happen all over the world all the time, and I can only expend so much energy caring about so many things. And while I certainly have empathy for people who are suffering, I cannot spend all my days focusing on every bad thing in the world. I mean, how many people are murdered in Chicago every single weekend? How many countries around the world are committing horrific war crimes? I mean, quite literally every day in wide open, and we don't think about them, we don't talk about them, we don't obsess about them. And then I started being told on Twitter what I was not allowed to say. And you guys know me. You try to tell me what I can and cannot talk about, and that's not going to go too well. And, I'm going to offer some, and so then I started caring. And so then I started hanging out in all of these Twitter spaces. I have been in dozens and dozens and dozens of Twitter spaces, from on both sides of the issue, both pro-Israel Twitter spaces, pro-Palestine Twitter spaces, kind of like neutral Twitter spaces, where they're just reporting news. And so I feel like I've got a pretty firm grasp of what I think of the situation. And my grasp of the situation is not going to make people happy. And I just want to talk about it a little bit before we get into the video today. I'm not on anyone's side. I think that Hamas has done horrific things to Israel. I also think that Israel has treated Palestinians atrociously for decades. And what really bothers me about this entire situation is that it doesn't matter if I say I don't care if Israel exists. It doesn't matter if I say that Israel has the right to defend itself. It doesn't matter if I say I really don't care if people are Jewish or not. It makes no difference to me. If I don't come out in full-throated support of Israel and celebrate the genocide of Palestinians, because that's what it is. I really do hope everyone understands this. This is a genocide of Palestinians perpetrated by Israel for revenge. So while I am sympathetic to the horrific things that Hamas has done to Israel, and they are horrific, I am not in any way, shape, or form going to celebrate the genocide of an entire people to feed the bloodlust that is going on conservative Twitter. I'm not going to do it. I don't think that either side is good. And I think that the people who are insisting that Israel has done nothing wrong, really, because that's not hinged into reality, folks. I'm sorry, it's just not. There are no heroes in this affair at all. And I'm watching people who claim to be pro-life celebrating the murder of not only an entire group of people, but a lot of them women, and 60% of the people in Gaza are under 18. The vast majority of people in Gaza had nothing to do with this. But I can't say that, or else I'll be called an anti-Semite. And so I'm pretty disgusted with everyone right now, if I'm honest about it. Everyone who is shilling for either pro-Israel or pro-Palestine, because I don't think there are any heroes in this situation. And the fact that no one is allowed to point out that Israel is not innocent in this. They're not. And the fact that no one is allowed to say, why are conservative pro-lifers celebrating the genocide of an entire group of people? Like, to watch, like, it was so disgusting to me to what Laura Loomer was doing a countdown on Twitter to the leveling of Gaza. There have been people talking about begging for the entire area to be turned into a parking lot, celebrating it, cheering it on. The bloodlust is disgusting. It really is. On both sides. And so the reason I took yesterday off was I was really feeling sick to my stomach. You know, there was a story today. And by the way, and everyone needs to be prepared for this, there was a story today going around Twitter being pushed by conservative influencers that said that Hamas had decapitated 40 babies. And it didn't even start off with that. At first it was Hamas had set fire to 40 babies, and it was accompanied by a picture that looked atrocious, but it didn't actually look like babies. And so I was like, what's going on? And then the story changed. It went from setting fire to 40 babies to decapitating 40 babies with no evidence provided. No evidence provided at all. Now, I'm old enough to remember when there was testimony in front of Congress. Was it in front of Congress? During the Iraq War era. I'm old enough to remember that people were testifying and swearing to God, all these atrocities are taking place in Iraq, crimes against humanity. What was it, incinerators then? And it all turned out to be bullshit. We went to war based on bullshit. And so I kind of just asked on Twitter, I said, is there any evidence of these 40 decapitated babies? Now, I'm not arguing that Hamas is innocent. Hamas is obviously not innocent. Hamas has committed atrocious crimes. Atrocious. Like, mind-bogglingly bad. They're not innocent. But I asked her, I was like, is there any evidence that this is true? And what people kept saying to me was, it's on Telegram, it's on Telegram, it's on Telegram, it's on Telegram. Okay, we'll put it on Twitter, because here's the thing. I've been consuming a lot of this content in the past couple of days. I have seen videos of dead babies in Gaza. Multiple videos of dead babies as a result of the airstrikes in Gaza over the past 2 days. So don't tell me you can't post it on Twitter. If there's evidence, fucking post it. And of course, no one did. And they kept posting other things. Well, these journalists swear it's true. Okay, how, like, did they take pictures? What did they see? Or you're an anti-Semite. Okay, well, fine. You guys have been calling me an anti-Semite for 3 days for not engaging in your fucking bloodlust. But do you have any evidence? Is this true? If it's true, it's horrific. I'll denounce it, man. But, like, do you have any evidence, or is this another babies in incubators thing where that's what it was? It was like the Iraqis were taking babies out of the incubators? Because that never happened. But someone swore that it did. Like, trust me, bro. Well, guess what? Right before, a couple hours ago, I guess. Breaking news! Israeli army tells the news that they have no information confirming allegations that Hamas beheaded babies. This was shared all over Twitter this morning as though it was the God's honest truth. This was shared by massive conservative influence. We swear it's true. We swear it's true. We swear it's true. Cross our heart and hope to die. Trust us, bro. Turns out it's not true. Now, again, I am not arguing that Hamas has not done horrific things. Of course they have. That is undeniable. But why are you spreading bullshit in order to feed the bloodlust of conservative Twitter? Why do you, if Hamas is really so horrible, and I don't actually think it's up for debate whether or not they're horrible, but, like, if that's true, then why do you have to make shit up? Oh, did Tim Pool jump the gun on this? I didn't see Tim. Well, Tim blocked me on Twitter a long time ago, so I don't obviously see his Twitter, but it wouldn't surprise me if he jumped on it. I know Charlie Kirk did. I know someone who I consider, like, Andrew Gold. I adore Andrew Gold. I think Andrew Gold is great. Seeing Andrew Gold's channel just explode has been, like, I've been so happy for him. Right before this stream, he was doing a stream on this story. And I understand he has family involved in this, and so it's an emotional thing for him, and I feel for him, and I feel for his family. I really, really, really do. But this story is not true. So why are we talking about it as if it is? What's really going on is they are trying to incite people so that the United States has no choice but to get involved, which will cause an inevitable war with Iran, which will be devastating. But the neocons don't care. The neocons don't care. I don't support anyone, but if you are going to demand that I take your side in order to consume my content, then you can F right off. This is the other thing that's happened over the past couple of days, is I've had long-term audience members on my channel demand that I take their side and demand that I parrot their talking points and demand that I don't question anything at all, or else they're just going to be forced to unfollow me. They're going to be forced to unsubscribe. Well, go fuck yourselves. If you are only here to hear the talking points that you are desperate for, you can go somewhere else for that, because I'm not going to lie to coddle your feelings. It is not going to happen. This will never be a Tim Pool. If you want to be control, if you want to hear from someone who's controlled by his audience, Tim Pool is a perfect channel for you. The Daily Wire, perfect. There are many creators out there who are completely controlled by their audience. That's not going to happen here. I have never had that type of relationship with my audience. I never will have that type of relationship with my audience. My only commitment, the commitment that I've made to people for years now, is I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm going to tell you the truth, and I'm going to show you receipts to back up what I say. And if I don't have receipts to show it, then I don't talk about it. But I am not going to pander to what people want. I am not going to pander to people demanding that I join a side when I think that both sides are behaving atrociously. I don't want to be involved. Sadly, that's not the reality of the situation. And sadly, this looks like it's going to be a world-changing conflict that's going to go on for a little while. And so we have to talk about it, and I have to pay attention to it, because that sadly is the place that I live in. Everyone here is allowed to have an opinion. I don't mind. I don't mind at all if people disagree with me. You're allowed to disagree with me. What you're not allowed to do is demand that I pander to you and whatever talking points you are desperate to hear at the time, because I don't think there are heroes in this situation. I don't think there are good guys in this situation. I think that that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and I think that Israel has treated the people of Palestine atrociously for decades. For decades. And it is mind-boggling to me that there is an entire group of people right now that is unwilling to acknowledge that when you essentially lock an entire population of people in an open-air prison, that at some point, something like this is going to happen. This was predictable. This was always going to happen with how the Palestinians were being treated. And I don't know how all of these conservative influencers who claim to be pro-life are calling for the death of an entire people, and in the same breath calling them monsters, calling them subhuman. They're, again, guys, 60% of the people in Gaza right now are under the age of 18. I find the whole thing to be disgusting. I find it to be distasteful. And I find it to be completely indicative of where we are as a society. Did Nick Fuentes make a video about this? He did. He had a stream last night that I happened to watch because I actually did want to hear Nick Fuentes' take on this. And you couldn't have shocked me more, because of course you're expecting Nick Fuentes to say some really anti-Semitic shit around this. Do you know what Nick Fuentes said on his stream yesterday? He said that what he wanted was the American first position, which was to end this as quickly as possible, basically for the United States to avoid war with Iran at all, if by any means necessary, avoiding war with Iran. And Nick Fuentes actually said that he wanted to see Israel stabilize relations with other countries in the region. Nick Fuentes isn't calling for the death of Israel. He's not pro-Palestinian either, by the way. He doesn't care about either of them. He had actually one of the more principled positions I've heard so far, which is, I hate both sides. I don't think we should be involved. I don't want to go to war with Iran. It's probably better for everyone if Israel normalized relations with other countries in the region. I was like, holy shit. Nick Fuentes is the voice of reason. That's the time we live in. That is the time that we live in. I don't demand anything. You're putting words in my mouth. Well, you come in my channel, you say I'm going to unsubscribe unless you say X, Y, B, and Z. I think you can see why I might have thought that. Thanks for putting me in timeout so I can explain. I'm Palestinian. I've been there and I see what goes on. I almost died. I'm really sorry about that. I hope you don't have family there. Anyway, so I did a poll on Twitter today. I'm really sorry that your family's in danger. And I bet that this guy isn't hearing a lot of that among all of the bloodlust over his family and his loved ones. I'm really sorry that your family's in danger. I'm sorry, by the way, to anyone that's in Israel too, or has family in Israel too. The entire situation sucks. So I knew we had to talk about this today. And so I did a poll on Twitter earlier, and there are basically two different angles that I could see approaching this from for right this second. Number one, a lot of people have been talking about like the left's reaction in terms of decolonization, which I don't know why everyone was so shocked that decolonization would be violent revolution. I mean, of course, I don't think anyone on this channel was shocked that decolonization means violent revolution. Just quick, too long didn't read, guys. Colonization refers to the act of taking land and making it private property from quote unquote like oppressed people. You're taking land and making it private property. Decolonization refers to taking the land back. Because remember, socialists are all about private property, capitalism. They view private property to be the ultimate enemy. Capitalism is the ultimate enemy. Capitalism and private property are seen interchangeably. So, of course, colonization is about going into an area and taking land and making it private property. Decolonization is liberating the land, taking it back. How do you think that people are going to take it back? Of course, it's going to be through violent revolution. It always was. So we do need to look into decolonization at some point. But the topic that people voted for, and it was a narrow vote, was that they wanted to learn about what socialists believe about Israel and Palestine. So I went to our old standby of Haymarket Books, and they do actually have a ton of videos on both decolonization and on Palestine, Israel. Now, they don't have anything over the past couple of days, but they do have this video from 6 months ago, and I thought this might be a really good place to start in terms of getting a sense of like what the far left. Guys, do people is this happening for other people, or is this just Ninja Artist? Because I don't see anyone else but Ninja Artist saying that. Anyway, I thought it would be a good idea for us. This is going to be a little bit, well, it's going to be Socialism Saturday on a Tuesday. We're going to watch Socialism on a Tuesday. And so I wanted to get a sense of what the far left thought just generally prior to the actual conflict starting. What did they think about Israel and Palestine? Now, I know that they're going to be pro-Palestine. This actually shouldn't surprise anyone. Number one, because I mean, I hate to put it this way, and okay, I'm just going to say it. Can you think of a population of people that represents capitalism more than the Jews? Of course, the number one enemy of socialists is capitalism. Whiteness means capitalism. Socialists actually do believe that Jews are quote unquote white because Jews are synonymous with capitalism in many circles. I don't make the rules, bro. But so of course, socialists are going to be on the side of Palestinians because Palestinians are going to be darker skin color, which socialists like, and they are going to be the oppressed people, and Palestinians are the ones that had their land stolen. And I'm giving the socialist perspective now by the evil capitalists, otherwise known as the Jews. Again, I'm saying the socialist perspective. So I think that we can expect that socialists are going to be pro-Palestine. And of course, as soon as I looked up this video, we've got Palestine with the nice big Palestinian flag, Israel, and the changing global order, a Marxist perspective. This video is from just 6 months ago, so it's relatively recent. Israel is currently undergoing unprecedented intra-Jewish social and political convulsion in light of policies propagated by the ultra-religious nationalist government coalition now in power. The latter also pushes forward intensifies assault against Palestinians by the occupation army and settler movement, captured most starkly in the Huwara, I don't know what that is, program. Hopefully they'll explain that. If someone knows what that is, please let me know in the chat. Huwara. I have no idea what that is. Palestinian resistance also appears to be entering a new era. You don't say. As an intifada-like movement against Israeli targets unfolds across the West Bank, led by new Palestinian political actors. These developments take place on the backdrop of shifting regional and global dynamics that include the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Arab-Israel normalization deals, and the rise of the multipolar global order. How should we make sense of the current situation, and what do these changes mean for a struggle for a free Palestine today? That's what we are going to be watching today to learn what the socialists generally, not this conflict specifically, although if they do a live stream or something about that, I'm sure we'll tune into it. Bot says Hawara, I don't know how to pronounce that, is an archaeological site in ancient Egypt, south side of the Cry. I don't know how to pronounce any of this stuff, Bot. Thank you though for the little bit of research there. All right, guys, so that's what we're doing today. Before we get into it, I do just want to remind people, please do make sure you are subscribed to my Substack. Now, if you're new to my channel, coming from the knitting stuff that's been going on for the past couple days, so I did something a little subversive. I know I would never do anything subversive. And I basically, so those who know, like, there's this mystery knit along going on where my favorite knitting designer, or I guess formerly favorite knitting designer, basically got canceled for saying that he designed a swastika when he didn't design a swastika. I put a video of it the other day so you can actually see the design. I'm actually going to finish my band shawl portion on the stream today so you can actually see it's almost done. Does this look like a swastika to anyone? No, it doesn't. Anyway, the knitting designer got canceled by a massive cancel mob, and as a result of that, he took down the pattern that I now have as a PDF, and he also took down a video on his YouTube channel that was teaching people how to knit the pattern, and he replaced it with a new video. And I knew he was going to take it down because he was bending the knee to the woke cancel mob, and so I downloaded it before he took it down, and I put it up on my YouTube channel. So if you guys are seeing like just a random knitting video of like, and you're like, Carlin, what the fuck is this? It's because I'm being subversive in the knitting wars, and I'm making sure that people who still want to knit the pattern that I don't think looks like a swastika, I want to make sure that people who are still knitting the pattern had access to the video, because F the cancel mob. And anyway, so I've got a lot of new subscribers to the channel from that, which I didn't expect. So welcome if you guys are here. I honestly don't talk about knitting that much on the channel. I apologize, but I'm glad I was able to provide you with that service. If you want to learn what was going on with the update in the knitting wars, we've got this article up here over on the Substack, Woke Knitters Strikes Again and West Knits Bend the Knee. That actually has the PDF of the clue as well as a backup copy of the video. I also have this article last night, How the Cancel Mob Makes You Bend the Knee, that was inspired by this whole situation. It talks about how the mob is going to gaslight you, and that's part of the point of a cancel mob, is they're going to gaslight you. You can find all that and much more over on my Substack, which is Carlin, Karlyn.substack.com. Again, that is Carlin, Karlyn.substack.com. Link is in the description below, and if you want to support the work I'm doing and get access to a whole bunch of perks to include 2 community Zoom calls with me every single week. The next one is tomorrow at noon Eastern time. You get access to the supporter Discord. You get access to our bitchcraft that we're doing on Saturday at 3 p.m., etc., etc., etc. You can sign up to support my work for $8 a month or $80 a year, which of course I do appreciate. I also want to make sure to go through the super chats that have come in. I do appreciate it. Elena, it is a zero-sum game. You're either an anti-Semitic or Islamophobic. You're either anti-Semitic or Islamophobic. Great. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly the time we're living in. Thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. Nuritu says, as Brad said yesterday, Israel is Ukraine for conservatives. Ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth? And again, like, people are allowed to take a side if they want to. I just wish that people weren't lying. If you have to lie to support a tribe, you're in a cult, people. Naruto also says Nick Fuentes and Vivek Ramaswamy are the only voices of reason on the issue. God help us all. Yeah, I haven't heard Vivek's take on it yet. I know he did an interview with Tucker Carlson, but I haven't heard that yet. Tayton says, I'm very curious of the Egypt intelligence warning Israel, and if it's true, then that should be a starting point. Well, that's the other thing. I think Israel knew what was going to happen. The minute that all this stuff started, my instinct was screaming, Israel knew, Israel knew, Israel knew. Now, they may not have taken it seriously, kind of like how the United States knew 9/11 was going to happen before it did, but I think that they knew what was going to happen. And then we found out yesterday, Egypt told Israel it was going to happen, and Israel was just like, yeah, okay. So I think they knew it was going to happen. I think they let it happen. I think they wanted an excuse to level Gaza. Now they have it. That's my opinion. You can disagree. Nick, thank you for being a member of the channel for 12 months. Why I don't want to go back to war, fought enough to know that eventually you become the monster you are fighting against when emotions cloud judgment. And I think that that's honestly one of the things that's been so disgusting for me to see is, like, again, if you're calling for the eradication of an entire people, maybe you've lost the plot. Maybe you've lost the plot a little bit. There's a word for that, and it's called genocide. Chris, thank you for the super chat. We need to listen to Admiral Akbar. It's a global trap. Tucker warned about deep state lying into World War III. Can you interview Scott Horton? I don't know if I want to interview Scott Horton, but I was thinking about watching the interview that Elijah Schaffer did with him because I heard that pissed a whole bunch of people off. Scott Horton, I think, is generally pretty good. I know he's been doing a lot of interviews. So instead of just like redoing something someone else is doing, maybe I was thinking about watching the interview that Elijah did with him, because I also think that Elijah Schaffer has also had really good takes on this. He's actually been really nuanced on this. It's like, it's very striking to me to see the people who have kind of come up as like the nuanced voices of reason. I was like, all right, that's interesting. Anyway, guys, let's get into the video. We are watching today from the socialist book publisher, Haymarket Books. Hey, Alexandra, I was thinking about you the other day. I was like, Alexandra hasn't been around lately. I hope she's doing well. We are watching from the socialist book publisher, Haymarket Books. This is a presentation from 6 months ago, so this is not current. But what I want to do is to get a good idea of what socialists believe about Israel and Palestine in general. To anyone that's new here, I am not a socialist in any way. I'm pretty much the opposite. But the reason that we watch socialism is to get a good sense of what the far left actually thinks and what they believe and what they're telling each other when people like us aren't listening. Like, how are they actually training each other? The goal here is not to debunk them. The goal here is to understand them. If you have never watched socialism with me before, welcome. Let us know in the chat if you've never watched, if this is your first time watching socialism with me, because I normally do this on Socialism Saturdays, which is Saturday at 6 p.m. If you've never watched socialism with me, let us know in the chat and welcome. And this might be a lot. I'm just going to warn people. We don't normally wade into international issues on socialism. I don't know how this is going to go. Socialists speak in a completely different language. I will do my very best to decode the language. People in the chat will do their very best to decode the language. But if this is your first time watching socialism with us, this might be a bit overwhelming. It is not you, it's them. They speak very flowery, very highfalutin language. They use a coded language, which means words don't mean what you think they do. They actually mean something else. There's going to be a lot of word salad we have to get through. But in the course of it, we're going to get some good golden nuggets about what the far left actually thinks about the entire affair, which I think will be illuminating for many of us, just to have a good sense of what we can expect, because there is the question that I have been wrestling with is like, how is the far left going to react to this? How is the far left going to use this situation to try to gain power? And I, of course, have some ideas about how they're going to do it. Oh, actually, we will never not do Socialism Saturday. Sometimes we just do extra socialism midweek. I have some ideas about how the far left are going to use the situation to try to gain power, but I think that I wanted to be a little bit more informed because I've just never listened to them talk about this topic before. So we're all going to suffer together. Go team. Let's get this. Yeah, I am planning on doing the decolonization episode in the future too. John, don't worry about it. Akshay says, remember, the socialists share your vocabulary, but they don't share your dictionary. So just because they're using a word, it doesn't mean they're using the same definition of the word as you. All right, let's see what they have to say.
Hello and welcome to everyone joining us today. My name is Brechna Aftab and I work for Haymarket Books. Before we begin, on behalf of Haymarket Books, I want to express our solidarity in absolute terms with those struggling in Jerusalem and all across Palestine today against the ongoing violence and brutality of Israeli settler colonialism. In light of cynical and distorted mainstream media coverage and reporting on Palestine, it is crucial that we platform voices against settler colonialism, against apartheid, and for a liberated Palestine. We're very grateful to our speakers for joining us today for this conversation. Sai and Tawfiq will be helping.
You know, it's right off the bat right there. They're like, we're in solidarity with Palestine, bro. Like, they don't try to hide it. They aren't covering it up. Now, what do they mean? So what I'm going to guess is that these people think that Israel stole Palestinian land because they're talking about colonization again. Colonization means going in and acquiring private property, private land from some indigenous oppressed group, okay? Decolonization means taking the land back. It's really that simple. A lot of people are going to explain colonization, decolonization in like very wordy, very flowery terms, but here's what you need to think. Colonization, taking of private property. Decolonization, taking it back. How did people expect they were going to take it back? I want to say this other thing though, and I said this in the video that I posted last night about all the knitting stuff. Like, the irony of this in the knitting world, and this does relate back to what we're watching, is that the people who are all upset about this knitting pattern and claiming that this knitting pattern is a swastika, they're far leftists. Far leftists don't like Israel. Far leftists really are anti-Zionist. Far leftists don't believe that Israel has a right to exist. Anyone participating in a cancel mob about this, unless they're a useful idiot, is probably a far leftist, which means they don't even like the Jews to begin with. They're completely in support of Palestine, but yet they're complaining about this being a fucking swastika. Please.
Us make sense of recent tensions between liberal and religious Zionists and whether we are seeing.
Nope, this is not what it means. No. John, you're using right-wing talking points. We don't do that here. Decolonization does not mean killing Europeans. The far left is not against Western culture, guys. The far left is against capitalism. They're against private property. They are not against Europeans. There are a lot of far leftists that are in Europe. The far left groups in Europe are more powerful than the far left groups here. So no, it does not mean killing Europeans. That is not true. Whiteness, white supremacy, anything that it sounds like it's about skin color is never about skin color. It is always about capitalism.
Changes in Palestinian resistance against Israel's colonial project. We will also hear from them on how we can understand recent developments in light of shifting global and regional geopolitical dynamics. So without further delay, I would like to introduce our two brilliant comrades, Sai Englert and Tawfiq Haddad. Sai Englert is a lecturer at Leiden University in the Netherlands. He works on settler colonialism, Zionism, labor movements, and anti-Semitism. He is a member of the editorial boards of Notes from Below and Historical Materialism.
Anti-Semitism, how ironic.
He is the author of Settler Colonialism and Introduction. Tawfiq Haddad is a Palestinian academic and the author of Palestine Limited, Neoliberalism and Nationalism in the Occupied Territories. He currently directs the Council for British Research in the Levant's Kenyan Institute in East Jerusalem and has worked in various capacities across the occupied.
I just want to note that the audio issues are their issues. They're not our issues. Socialists suck at technology. It's just the way it goes. We have to work through it.
Palestinian territories as a journalist, researcher, consultant, editor, and publisher. We'll also be taking questions from the audience, so if you do have any questions, please do feel free to share those in the chat. Sai and Tawfiq, thank you again. Handing over to you.
Hi, folks. I think I'm going to start this off. So I'd like to thank the organizers, Haymarket Books, and give a big red salute to all the comrades out there who I may know or not. I did a book back in the day with Haymarket, so it's great to be back here and also to be speaking to this, your audience, your wide audience. I'd also like to say that I'm obviously speaking today in the capacity as an individual researcher and not for my organization, which is kind of important for me to say. Events in Israel, Palestine today are quickly escalating, as folks may know. I'm not sure if folks have had the chance to actually see the news today, but like 30 rockets from South Lebanon were fired into northern Israel today.
This was 6 months ago, remember?
Sort of posing one of the most sort of, very much speaking to the explosive potential of the situation, not just in Israel, Palestine, but regionally. And hopefully my comments can sort of speak to where some of that is coming from.
Hang on. So Recht, you're not, here's the problem, Recht, you're not using socialist properly. So the mistake that Recht is making with this is that he's using the normie translation of what fascism means, okay? What Recht says, wait, Nazis, fascism, don't like Jews, and socialists don't like Jews. I knew the wolf was wearing sheep's clothing. Socialists don't define fascism in the same way that like we think about like fascism in relation to the Nazis. So fascism for socialists means free market capitalism. So same vocabulary, different dictionary.
I've been told that I've been given 10 minutes to try and put this all into context, which is not very much time, and it's very complicated, but hopefully I'll be able to provide a decent amount of background to be able to understand sort of the large threads of what's going on, and we can get into more detail once we're done speaking and you guys folks provide their questions. So I'm happy to field all that stuff. So I guess the main thing that I want to sort of speak to today is probably sort of framing it in terms of all the dynamics that we're witnessing today largely arise from the quote unquote success of Israel and the Western powers vis-a-vis what they thought was a great success in terms of their ability to contain, suppress, and kind of destroy the Palestine project / question. Now, sort of to understand that broad, like they are today essentially the victim of their successes, which truth.
Alexa says, all the conservatives who were anti-Ukraine involvement are now begging for bombs and money. Isn't that ironic? Guys, I really just want to encourage everyone, make sure you're paying attention to who was anti-Ukraine war but pro-war in Israel, because you should never listen to those people again. Those people are unprincipled. They are untrustworthy. They are not people who you should be taking seriously, because those people will change on a dime depending on which way their political tribe is flowing. And you never want to be beholden to a group of tribalists because they will flat out lie to you in order to gain political points.
Be told we're not successes at all, but actually kick the main questions of the quote unquote conflict to other theaters, complexifying them, raising the stakes much, much higher than they were, and bring them to a level of what could be a incredibly destructive regional war that might be on the horizon. And I think for that reason, it's important to sort of speak of the gravity of the situation today. What happened in terms of the rockets being fired is definitely only a small message that is being sent today between those actors, so to speak, but is a harbinger of potentially much, much greater destruction and very dangerous situation. So I do want to impart that to the audience today, that I think folks need to be paying attention to the situation very closely and recognize the potential dangers and dramatic nature of what we're witnessing today. So to put all this in context, we really kind of need to roll the film back like 30 years to the Oslo process. So this year, 2023, is 30 years to Oslo. Oslo was seen as this sort of peace process that was marketed to the world, where they had the Nobel Prize given to the people who signed it and all that stuff. But fundamentally, what the Oslo because I don't have time to go into the Oslo thing, and I imagine that a lot of you folks know what the background to Oslo was. But essentially, the Oslo process was basically a process whereby the two players, the PLO and Israel and the Western camp, putting them together as one, sort of find mutual interests at a particular historical moment. But fundamentally, Israel and the Western powers were the stronger party. And they basically, the US pushes Israel, encourages Israel to sort of take advantage of the historical weakness of the PLO to essentially, Israel was facing this important dilemma and crisis in terms of the fact that we had the first Intifada from 1987 to around 1993. This posed a major contradiction for Israel in terms of it being able to manage the Palestinians in occupied territories at the West Bank, East Jerusalem, in Gaza. And their solution for that, and that the main elements of that contradiction was the fact that Israel, as the Jewish democratic state, was basically controlling millions of Palestinians, and it didn't want to give them citizenship because that would erode the quote Jewish character of the state. And they, if they gave them citizenship, if they deprived them from citizenship, it would mean that they would be it would erode the democratic character of the state. So the historical Israeli solution and American solution was basically to create a kind of autonomy scenario where Palestinians would have a form of self-governance, but this self-governance in the main concentrated cities of the OPT would not be strong enough to form the basis of a Palestinian state. Okay, but at the same time, they needed a centralizing power to be able to manage and quote govern these territories and this population, because they were rising up and they were actually destroying the Israeli settlement project in the West Bank and Gaza. So the Americans said, get the PLO in town. They will be the main address. We will be able to contain them in these major Palestinian cities. And by essentially controlling the commanding heights over, and when I mean commanding heights, I mean the discursive heights, the actual physical heights, the fact that to leave these cities, you needed to go through Israeli-controlled, I mean, the entire area was Israeli-controlled, but basically, the Israelis needed to separate from the Palestinians, and they needed to sort of contain them. And the Oslo Accords allowed for that containment process to take place, and the establishment of an autonomy scenario where Israel could basically say, we're not responsible for these folks anymore, even though in truth, they were responsible for everything that entered and exited the area. they were responsible for the air, the water, the electricity,
This is one of the things that I really don't understand, like the conservative argument on, where they're like the Palestinians can just leave. Like, no, they can't. They quite literally can't. Like right now in Palestine, they are bombing the only place that Palestinians can actually leave. They're actually like leveling it with bombs right now as we speak, or they were a couple hours ago. I saw a video of it. And so it's like, where do you exactly expect them to go? Because they have to get permission to leave. They have to go through, someone was talking about in one of the Twitter spaces how like something that like a trip that might take like 40 minutes to an hour in the United States quite literally takes all day in Palestine, because they have to keep going through checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint after checkpoint. They aren't allowed to leave without government permission, and now they're bombing the only places where they can actually leave. I don't know why we can't acknowledge this.
The internet, the telephone lines, the skills, the people, the finance. So they had master control over the Palestinians, behind the illusion that the Palestinians had some sort of state in the making. Of course, Israel and the West had no interest long-term to kind of solve the major issues of the Israel-Palestine conflict. And we understand now today how this dynamic develops over 30 years to lead to the scenario today where basically human rights groups can only but confirm that essentially an apartheid state and infrastructure has been established. And that means both that there's different legal regimes that govern if you're Jewish or if you're Palestinian, Muslim or Christian or whatever, and let alone the infrastructure side of the coin. To bear in mind that when Oslo happened, there was 150,000, even less settlers in the West Bank. Today, there are more than 700,000 settlers in the West Bank, okay? So behind this illusion of the peace process, Israel is able to greatly strengthen the settlement project, win time to do that, build that infrastructure. And through the building of infrastructure that linked the settlement project and expanded it, it obviously broke up and fragmented the Palestinian project and contained, most importantly, the Palestinian national movement and leadership within these areas behind this very complicated discourse of security and peace. And if you were against it, you were sort of against peace. And that was one of the most important enduring elements of what came out of the Oslo process. So Oslo process basically was aimed to solve the Jewish democratic contradiction or dilemma, so to speak, and particularly the crisis of the Intifada through this autonomy scenario. This process essentially resulted over the past 30 years in the globalization of Israel, and as well as its capital.
I mean, one would think people in the chat are talking about how like Egypt won't take them, like none of the other countries want to take them. One would think that the population that might be sympathetic to no countries wanting you are the Jews. I mean, I'm just saying, there was a time when no countries wanted the Jews either. I just like, anyway.
And security dimensions. This is important to understand because Israel was severely contained. Like there were more international states internationally that recognized the PLO than recognized Israel. There was a secondary boycott against Israel. They couldn't get to India. They couldn't get to China. And Israeli capital was interested in globalizing only through the peace process. And this illusion of this sort of willingness to make peace was Israel able to reach beyond its traditional allies in the Western hemisphere, so to speak. As I said as well, it contained the Palestinians in this very sort of dystopian situation where essentially Palestinians were locked in 10 different major clusters of little islands, all surrounded by settlements and Israeli military posts. But if you even break that down, 150 little islands and islets, whatever, across the West Bank. And of course, Gaza was a whole nother story, let alone Jerusalem was broken off from the West Bank. So Gaza actually functionally becomes the largest island in the Palestine archipelago of Israel-Palestine apartheid today, okay? Another important dimension of what took place over the past 30 years was there was this major intervention of the international powers. They were the ones who laundered the whole agreement and process, and they funded it. In fact, they funded $35 billion of Western taxpayer money came in to fund this arrangement, to fund the infrastructure of apartheid, to fund the startup of the Palestinian Authority. And of course, a key dimension of the Palestinian Authority was providing jobs, many of which were security force jobs, but also the jobs of governance and quote unquote civil administration, an administration that really didn't have that much power. It always had to go beyond, ask the Israelis or the Americans, give us money, allow us to do this, build that, whatnot. And at every turn, this provided the Israelis and the Americans an opportunity to basically blackmail the Palestinians. Okay, now the point here, though, is this major international intervention, which also included the establishment of different international bodies and the direct intervention of people like the World Bank and the IMF in an advising capacity over the whole situation, led to the creation of an infrastructure that I would argue was not designed for conflict resolution, of course, but was designed for conflict management in a broader mentality that we need to contain and control this conflict because it's so explosive and so it leads to, you know, exploding and pissing off all these Arabs and Muslims that we need to sort of.
That to me actually seems like a pretty kind of like reasonable perspective on it. Like this reality, and again, we're going from, this is the perspective of socialists, so I'm going to acknowledge that there are probably other sides to this that we're not considering today, because this is a video about socialists and their perspective on Israel and Palestine, right? But to me it seems like it's actually a pretty, you know, Kyle, I was looking into this. I need to look into that. I'm going to come back to that in a sec. To me it seems like a pretty kind of like even-keeled perspective to say this was not a situation that was set up for conflict resolution. This was set up for conflict management, to make sure it didn't, or to try to like prevent it from like getting out of control or whatever. That actually to me doesn't seem like a crazy socialist thing. That to me seems like reality. Kyle says, listen to an audiobook of Marx's on the Jewish question yesterday, and if you cut through the bramble of Marx's prose, he essentially says that Jewish culture is capitalist. See, whiteness means capitalism. And until the Jew self emancipates itself from its Jewishness, which means capitalism, and society emancipates itself from Jewishness, which means capitalism, the perfect state cannot be achieved. The perfect state, according to Marx, is, of course, a state that is built on equity, which is the abolition of capitalism. Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate it.
Have those structures in place to be able to contain it when it explodes. Of course, I'm not speaking about longer term interests of what the Western imperial project or Israel's longer term interests, because I would also basically say even this arrangement, the Oslo Apartheid arrangement.
Hang on. We're not doing this shit today. I'm not doing this tribalist bullshit. I'm going to tell you guys right now, I am not interested in all Muslims are bad and all Muslims are terrorists and all Muslims want to bomb everyone everywhere and all Muslims are bad and we need to eradicate. I'm not doing this shit. Stop.
That emerged today, which wasn't entirely like teleologically determined, and obviously evolves over time and through the resistance of Palestinians didn't look exactly the way they wanted it to. But the point was, because including the fact that Israel maintained this, I believe, is basically was seen as a temporary solution to Israel's problems and dilemma. To basically, it was what was possible in light of the balance of power, so to speak. But Israel never could accept a Palestinian state or.
Yes, Cody. And the next thing you're going to say is that Gaza needs to be leveled because every Muslim in Gaza is a radical Muslim. I've been having this conversation for 3 straight fucking days. I am not doing it. Do not bring that shit here.
Even if the demographics of the situation got to such a level where Palestinians were a majority throughout the whole of OPT. Not just OPT, excuse me, historical Palestine between the river and the sea. And mind you, we're basically around 50-50 in terms of the amount of Jews and the amount of Palestinians between the river and the sea. Okay, so we're at a kind of important historical turning point.
All right,
and for that,
this is the last warning. I am going to ban anyone in the chat who is coming in here with tribalist propaganda talking points like this. You are getting a timeout. In the future, anyone who does it will be banned. I am so sick of this hating on all fucking Palestinians because they're brown and we don't like fucking brown people, conservative. Yeah, I fucking said it. I'm sick of it. That's not what we're doing here today. I don't want to hear it anymore in the chat. And if I hear it, you will be banned.
That reason that it's not just about containing the Palestinian issue, but that we also begin to hear more talk amongst the Israelis about we need to take more dramatic steps, whether it's in terms of more violence to actually crush Palestinian resistance, or if we need to open up these questions, we're willing to talk about new forms of transfer. But in any case, of course, establishing this whole framework was only possible through establishment of apartheid and lots of bloodshed on the Palestinian side, and also a fair amount of Israelis were killed in the process too, because Palestinians did not go down quietly. Now, part of the ironies of the situation today, insofar as this great infrastructure of conflict management as a temporary solution was established, and Israel was sort of basically freed to expand its settlement project and globalize and do what it did. An irony of the situation was that it animated and strengthened further national religious sentiment that was incipient within the Zionist project to begin with, because what in the end is the Jewish national project and the creation of Israel to begin with, and it also led to some extent the cashing out of the traditional Ashkenazi elite within Israel. When I mean cashing out, is basically they were the main benefactors of the globalization process that Israel went through. And they are already the cultural and political and economic elites of Israel that benefited from this Oslo victory/success. Now, the animation of the national religious dynamic and the giving of tailwinds to it.
So what he's saying is that in partitioning and again, this is the socialist perspective, so I'm not insinuating that this is the only perspective that exists, but what he's saying is that that like essentially the Jewish elite benefited financially from like partitioning the Palestinians into this area. Israeli officials want to control the Palestinians without being responsible for them. True. And Palestinians will never tolerate a Jewish government or a Jewish state. Also true. It needs outside intervention to stop. I agree with all of that, Kyle. Thank you.
In addition to the demographic dynamics within Israel, and the end of Israel, the traditional pragmatic labor Zionist historical role to establish the state was seen as basically over or had completed its historical role. So what we see today, after a period of instability of 5 different Israeli election cycles, is eventually this slow transition where the old powers that established the state and which were traditionally, historically hegemonic within Israel, today sort of like happy, sitting pretty, well, doing economically well. Many of them also have Western passports, whereas the second Israel, and I don't say that they were all within Zionist discourse. There was always the beautiful Israel and then the second Israel. The second Israel was the religious, the Orthodox communities, the Arab Jews, those who didn't fit the traditional sort of Ashkenazi new Jew model that Zionism was purporting to be creating here. So eventually what we see is these different social constituencies that were part of the Zionist project, but were not its initiators. Eventually,
so Nick Fuentes was actually, I think, talking about this yesterday on his stream, which is kind of like funny that they're both talking about the same thing. Nick Fuentes' take on it, and I think that this is probably correct, is like there may be Jewish infighting with different factions in Israel, where like some people are like some places are more some factions are more conservative, some are more progressive, some have different opinions on this, that, and the other thing. But like when there's conflict, it's what Nick Fuentes called it was like is like a family feud, essentially. It's like I can fight with my family, but you can't fight with my family. As soon as there's conflict, they coalesce, they come together, they're all on the same team, and they just go at the enemy. And so even though, because remember, this presentation was 6 months ago, they're talking about how there's different factions and they're kind of infighting, and this might be an opportunity, blah, 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 whatever. Those factions are no longer exist. Those factions are now united. So that's different from what was in the presentation 6 months ago.
Get to a stage where an alliance is formed between the national religious, the Orthodox communities, and the Arab Jews, largely speaking, arriving at demographic majority status in the context of the fragmentation of the opposition and essentially their capture of the state, okay? And that capture of the state is seen by them as a historical opportunity for them.
The whole point of this is to learn and listen to the socialist perspective. If you are going to shitpost, you don't belong here, goodbye. That person just got banned. I am not fucking around. Do not shitpost in my chat. Guys, if you're new here, there are 2 rules in my chat. Number 1, don't be a dick. You are in my house. I am not in your house. You are in my house. You will not insult me. You will not insult other people in the chat. You will not behave like a child. You will not throw a temper tantrum. You will not do any of those things. You will put on your big boy and girl pants and act like an adult. And if you don't want to do that, then you will not be here for very long. Number 2, no whining. If I tell you to stop doing something, then stop fucking doing it. Do not test me today, guys.
To finally realize their ambitions and interests vis-a-vis the Palestinians, but also their gripes vis-a-vis the Ashkenazi elite that used to, that had marginalized them, that was eating the lion's share of the pie previously. I won't go more into that dynamic. I'll let Sai probably talk more about it, and I probably said too much already. However, I just, on the Palestinian side, allow me to wrap up on the Palestinian side. This dynamic led to, of course, the containment of the Palestinian leadership and national project in this dystopian structure called the Palestinian Authority, which is a state in the making, but it never is able to realize itself in any way because it has no power and no means of lifting itself up from its structural containment and dependency within this apartheid framework. It also led, of course, to the fragmentation of OPT and whatnot. It also led to the containment of the party structure that were traditionally the civil society elements that had engaged in kind of representation and service provision for Palestinians, okay? So their containment, like their organizations get locked in, either they're completely outside because they're...
Yasmin asked, did Nick stream on Cozy or Rumble? I think he streamed on both, but I watch it on Cozy because even Cozy is better than Rumble. Nick Fuentes' platform is better than Rumble. What does that say? What a sad state of affairs for Rumble. No offense to the people on Rumble. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the platform.
Branded as terrorists, or they're locked in sort of NGO-like structures dependent upon Western funding and are locked in their wars of position with Israel, but are not able to take more frontal positions of defense against an average Palestinian in the OPT. Okay, this has led to basically large localization of the conflict in the individual little islands. Okay, and we see that in the explosion of Gaza once in a while, and now we see it in the West Bank, because basically the battle today is not for Gaza. The battle today is for the areas outside of the Area A in the West Bank that the settlers are basically encroaching on. So we see today the emergence of new localized political movements and organizations outside the traditional party structure, outside the Palestinian Authority, attempting to defend Palestinian interests and further them through by initiating, by attempting to resist and target Israeli targets, be they the army or settlers in these areas.
Okay, so his position, and please let me know if I'm getting this wrong, guys. I'm trying to repeat back to this because I think the easiest way to learn something is to try to explain it to other people, but please call me out if you think I'm wrong. His position is that the Palestinian Authority is basically feckless and doesn't actually have any influence, and it's basically like is never going to help, quote unquote, liberate Israel from the oppressors that are keeping them in this open air prison, and that in order to be liberated, Israel's going to have to find another way to do it. Am I that actually, like, I mean, again, that's not actually contradictory to my general kind of understanding of it. But let me know if I got that wrong.
And so that's why we see these dynamics in Nablus and Jenin. By the way, with Nablus and Jenin being not only Jenin being the poorest area, but also large areas of land where the settlements are actually really trying to push forward and encircle these areas. And then the final dynamic of this that I want to say is Jerusalem, where I am today, because Jerusalem was outside of this whole equation. Israel would never give up anything in East Jerusalem and wants to eternally control it, forever, of course. And so for that reason, the direct occupation and brutality of military governance over population in Jerusalem, particularly where all the holy sites are, in a context where you have this national religious zeitgeist and, ultra messianic, which believes it can realize its historical mission to finally erect the third temple. I mean, all yesterday they were arresting basically settlers in the old city who wanted to slaughter a goat on the Temple Mount. I mean, this is the Israeli Jewish democracy today. That's what it's all about, like slaughtering a goat on the quote unquote Temple Mount. So, but ironically, Jerusalem is, of course,
I don't know about that.
It's the key to the whole thing, because it doesn't just relate to Palestinians.
He is an actual socialist. This is a socialist YouTube channel. It's a socialist book publisher. He has written books for them. He is, I mean, like, it might have different terminology there. I'm not sure exactly, but like, he has sensibilities that align with the extreme far left. There's no doubt about it at all.
It relates to 1.5 billion Muslims.
But that doesn't mean he's wrong in his
and another
analysis.
400 million Arabs. So who are all in the area, who are all fasting right now in the middle of Ramadan. And it ironically becomes it's not ironic, but it becomes logically the live wire where this thing can explode, because basically it's the front line. I don't know if the third rail is the quite accurate way.
He was asked to focus on Israel. He's answering the question that he was asked. Everyone I'm not going to keep saying this, guys. I need you to take your tribalist hat off.
To say it. So essentially these rockets were fired today because 2 days ago they went in to Al-Aqsa at 4 a.m. and tried to kick out and arrested 400 worshippers who were there and beat everybody up in the middle of, the third most important mosque in all of Islam. So, and it's a very sensitive issue. So that's where we stand today. I'll leave it there. Thank you. Long.
Thanks, Tawfiq. I'll pick it up from here, and then the idea is also a bit that we that we discuss a little bit further, so you'll still have the opportunity to come back to things, and I think maybe it'll be useful for both of us to then reflect.
Hang on. Robert says, and Robert, I'm about to make an example of you. All governments historically commit crimes against humanity to further their own national agenda. Kind of seems like you're advocating for genocide there, though, Robert, so you might want to think about that. Concerning the current situation, what is the solution? I am not doing a stream about the solution. It's pretty clear to me that no one who has any, oh, look at that, I'm answering. Sit tight, bucko. Because you're the one in my chat right now literally advocating for genocide to take a tribalist shill position, so you can sit the fuck down and listen. The point of this stream is not to advocate for any solution because I'm not on either of your sides. The point of this stream, the only reason we're doing this stream, is to understand how socialists perceive Israel and Palestine. It's quite clear to me that none of you assholes are interested in any sort of solution at all. No one on the pro-Israel side is interested in any solution. No one on the pro-Palestine side is interested in any solution. And there are an awful lot of people advocating for a literal goddamn genocide and thinking they're doing it from their high horse of moral superiority. So spare me. Spare me your virtue signals in my chat, Robert.
On maybe how some of these kind of local processes relate to kind of larger regional and international ones. I wanted to start, the task I was given was to kind of shed some light on the current political crisis in Israel, and to kind of connect it, I think, to a lot of what Tawfiq has very helpfully kind of outlined. So in a nutshell, I assume people will have followed it, but since the beginning of the year, we've seen the kind of acceleration of two processes that are playing themselves out at the same time, which is on the one hand, and Tawfiq has spoken about it, the kind of unleashing of much more rapid and intense violence against the Palestinians, both militarily and through the kind of growth of confidence of the settler movement, which was perhaps captured the kind of most powerfully in the images that people will have seen of the pogrom in Huwara, where you see sort of hundreds of settlers descending on a Palestinian town and attacking Palestinians, breaking property, etc. And that really captures, I think, this acceleration of an ongoing and existing violence in the occupied territories that we've witnessed over the last few months. Since the beginning of the year alone, Israel has killed over 80 Palestinians, and points to the fact that this year will already be much more.
All right. If I hear, again, I feel like I'm having to stop the stream over and over and over again because people are not fucking listening. This is a typical narrative that you will hear on the left. No kidding. No kidding. This is the entire point of... Guys, if you are not here to learn about how socialists, the farthest of the far left, perceive the situation, then get the fuck out. Because to say, well, this is just a far left narrative. No shit, Sherlock. That is the entire point of the stream. It is the literal title of the stream. If you don't want to learn that, go somewhere else.
Sort of murderous than the preceding ones, which certainly weren't, peaceful peaceful. At the same time, what we've seen is this kind of explosion of massive demonstrations, road occupations, strikes, although I'll say something about that in a moment, within Israeli society itself. And both of these processes of kind of increased tension have as their immediate kind of starting point, although, as Tawfiq has already pointed to, they're part of much longer processes and developments, the election of the kind of latest Israeli government led by Benjamin Netanyahu, and the alliance of the most conservative right-wing elements inside of Israeli society that he could put together to build a majority. And so that goes from the kind of ultra-Orthodox parties all the way to the most accelerationist elements of the settler movement in the West Bank, including settlers in his government. Not that that's necessarily new. What is new is that includes open followers of the Kahanist movement, which is, very open and aggressive about its sort of eliminationist calls towards the Palestinians. Ministers who celebrated Baruch Goldstein, who committed the massacre in the mosque in Hebron in the late 1990s, etc., who kind of openly celebrate these sort of actors. And in fact, the finance minister, who is one of these settlers, has been put in charge of the West Bank, and so it's also the first time that a civilian politician is the Israeli head, let's say, of the occupied.
Isn't that interesting? Why was the finance minister put in charge of the West Bank?
Territories rather than a military person. In response to Huwara, he was asked, Smotrich, the politician, was asked to react to it, and his response was to say that he thought Huwara needed to be wiped off the map. So it gives an idea, and that the Israeli state should do it. So it gives an idea of
what? The finance minister who was put in charge of the West, did he just say the finance minister who was put in charge? Who needs to be wiped off the map? Hang on.
To react to it, and his response was to say that he thought Huwara needed to be wiped off the map.
What is Huwara? What is Huwara? Hang on. I need to look this up. I should have looked it up earlier. Huwara is a flashpoint town in the Israeli-Palestine conflict. Huwara is on the main road to nearby Israeli settlements, leading to frequent clashes. Okay, so it's basically like a town. Okay, so let me get this straight. The finance minister that was put in charge of the West Bank said that this one town, or thought that this one town, needed to be wiped off the map. No, Bot looked up something different. It wasn't spelled the same. I understand why she looked it up that way, but like it wasn't the same thing. Let me just go back.
Person in response to Huwara, he was asked, Smotrich, the politician, was asked to react to it, and his response was to say that he thought Huwara needed to be wiped off the map. So it gives an idea, and that the Israeli state should do it. So it gives an idea of the kind of people.
So the finance minister that got put in charge of the West Bank said, well, this is according to socialists, so we need to be, there are probably other perspectives to this. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. This guy is saying the finance minister that was put in charge of the West Bank said that Huwara needed to be wiped off the map and insinuated it was Israel's job to do it. All right.
People that are in play, and why they would give much greater confidence to both the military and the settler movement in the West Bank to carry out an increased kind of level of violence and assault against the Palestinians. At the same time, there is this real kind of social tension play itself out in Israel, and that is both in response to an immediate question, which is the fact that this government by Netanyahu is trying to use its majority to redraw lines inside of the Israeli state, and largely by taking on the High Court.
This is going to be the last time I'm going to warn you, because I've already warned you once. This is a far-left socialist perspective. The likelihood of them talking shit about anything to do with Palestine is not going to work. This is not an objective perspective. If you keep chatting in, saying, why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing that? Why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing that? And complaining about the fact that we're listening to far-left socialists, I'm going to time you out.
court, which the Israeli right and the religious right sees as a sort of liberal body that repeatedly stops it from doing what it wants. We should immediately bracket that, and we can perhaps say more about that later. It is that same High Court that legalizes settlements that are considered legal by no other body in the world except itself, and that has facilitated the kind of expansion of Israeli colonialism over a very long time and given it a kind of a veneer of legal and democratic rights where it has none. But nonetheless, it puts some limits on.
I just want to make sure everyone just heard what he just said, because it is the socialist perspective that so Israel wants to make it seem like what they were doing with Palestine had some sort of legal basis, but according to socialists, they don't perceive that what Israel did in regards to Palestine had any sort of legal basis to support it. And whether or not that's true is not the point. And I don't want to hear anyone saying that's not true for reason. I don't care. I don't give a fuck. What I do care about is the fact that far left socialists do not believe that there was any sort of legitimate authority that Israel had in this area. And that's important to understanding their perspective.
On that process, which the Israeli right sees as unacceptable. And so a series of kind of legal changes are being rushed through, or were being rushed through the Israeli parliament in an attempt at allowing the parliament to override the decisions of the High Court, as well as to strengthen the role of the government in selecting future appointees. There are a number of other laws that are also being passed. Perhaps the most important one is one that has given the Knesset majority, and therefore the government, the ability to limit massively the High Court's possibility of declaring a prime minister unfit to rule. And that's really a sort of immediate self-serving decision for Netanyahu, who is sitting trial for charges of...
Well, no, this isn't true. Socialists don't decide what is legitimate and what is not, but their perception of what is legitimate and what is not will dictate their actions in the situation. And so if we want to understand how the far left is going to react in this situation, we need to understand their perspective about what is and is not legitimate. That doesn't mean it's true. That doesn't mean it's something that we have to buy into. This is about understanding another person's perspective.
What do you call it? Accepting money in official positions. The word escapes me. And so could be challenged by the High Court in a way, bribery, and could be challenged by the High Court. And so kind of also laws of kind of immediate self-preservation. And this has triggered a massive immediate kind of confrontation in Israeli society, in which the long-term conflict that Tawfiq talked about is playing itself out once again in Israeli society, which is this conflict between an old Zionist elite organized around the Labour Party and its institutions that sees itself as liberal, democratic, part of the European world, etc., and that sort of defends its colonial process and the expulsion of Palestinians in a mix of a sort of a civilizing mission language and the need to defend itself. And that elite is seeing itself replaced. And really, that's a process that's been going since the late 1970s, but that has accelerated majorly over the last 2 decades by a new alliance between, on the one hand, an internationalized Israeli capital, and we'll talk about that. And so it's one of the ways in which I think it links to the kind of normalization deals we've seen, etc. It's a very also US kind of centered Israeli capital with a hyper-religious settler movement that is doing the colonial work. And that alliance that kind of was forged in the 1970s is really the only internally coherent political force.
Pop quiz. I talked about this at the beginning. What does colonization mean? Let's see who's been paying attention. What does colonization mean? What does decolonization mean? In plain English. People who weren't here at the beginning to listen to me yell at the beginning are not going to have it's not capitalism explicitly. Colonization means the taking of private property, owning the land, taking property from one group or property that was previously considered kind of like public or, dare I say, collective, and taking it and making it private property or taking it away from like whatever group, quote unquote, earned it. So that's colonization, the taking of property. And then decolonization is the taking back of the property. Exactly. Excellent. And why do socialists hate colonization? Because socialists hate private property and they want to abolish all private property. And socialists also want to revolt against the evil capitalists who have taken the private property, which is why there is violent revolution going on in this part of the world right now. You don't take the property back without a violent revolution. You don't overthrow capitalism without violence.
Inside of Israeli society. And so the social movements we're seeing for the moment is the alliance of everybody else that sees the kind of decisions being taken as a way for that bloc to lay a much more fundamental claim on the Israeli state. And I think rightly so. And so much more than what the movement has sort of called its defense of democracy, I think what we're seeing is an attempt by that very broad alliance that goes all the way from the Israeli trade unions and the kind of old leftovers of the labor Zionist movement to very much the center and the right of Israeli society, including elements of the settler movement, which ruled in a coalition until the last election, and people like Benny Gantz, who's very quickly becoming the kind of central figure of this movement, who is certainly not somebody that can be described as even within the Zionist movement as within its left, famously celebrated his role in the 2014 attack on Gaza, and the fact that he participated in bombing parts of Gaza back to the Stone Age, in his own words, which he then used to get himself elected. So saw it as a mark of pride. So a very broad kind of alliance that has one thing in common, which is an opposition to the kind of alliance between Netanyahu and this kind of more broad right, and opposes their attempt.
I think what he's saying is it seems as though there were different political factions within Israel, and people can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't want any tribalist bullshit though. And that some of them were like the more traditional, like Netanyahu, like conservatives, and some were more maybe progressive or whatever. And there were like these and remember, this was again 6 months ago. And they were kind of like warring with each other inside of Israel.
To lay a much more fundamental and long-lasting claim on the institutions of the state, including the judiciary. What both sides of this divide have absolutely in common, however, is a deep commitment to the Zionist movement and to its colonial project in Palestine. And I just think it's important to say that.
So what he's saying is there may have been these warring political factions in Israel, but both of those factions were deeply committed to oppressing the Palestinians.
When we discuss the movement, is that we're not seeing a sort of a progressive left opposing a dangerous right. We are seeing two sides of a colonial project confronting each other over who controls the state. A very powerful image of that is that when Palestinians have tried to participate in the movement, most of them haven't, and for very good reasons. They are confronted with both sides of their oppressors, those who have, often for kind of ideological reasons, for example, because they are members of the Communist Party, have found themselves excluded, attacked for raising Palestinian flags, censured when they've tried to speak on demonstrations. And it's been very clear that the question of Israel's colonial process is not to be questioned or to be linked to the rollback of civil liberties. One might ask, if you live in a state that denies the civil liberties of 50% of the people that live under its rule, whether it should be surprising that that process generalizes itself, but that is not a question that those social movements are prepared to ask themselves. I think part of the kind of confidence that the Netanyahu government has and is showing comes from the regional changes that we've seen over the last few years as well. And I think Tawfiq and I will perhaps speak about that a little bit more before we open to the floor. But I think the fact that Israel was able to sign a new round of normalization deals, and again, that's a long-term process that starts in the late 1970s, first with a peace treaty with Egypt, then with Jordan, a closer and closer collaboration with Gulf states, and which is sort of officialized in the so-called Abraham Accords in 2020, in which the kind of direct diplomatic, economic, and political connections with largely the Gulf, as well as Morocco, is becoming more officialized, and so that these states are also prepared to distance themselves more and more, even of their rhetorical support for Palestinian liberation, which was only that, rhetorical, but even that can sort of increasingly be abandoned. That gives a much greater confidence as well to Israel to start pushing on some of the things that had been considered red lines in the aftermath of Oslo, and that clearly the settler movement is trying to redefine for the moment, and to lay claims on kind of greater areas of Palestinian land that had been considered sort of out of reach, which I think very much the two should sort of be connected. I just wanted to end maybe on saying, where is this going to go? People will have seen that I'm a little bit confused about time now. I think it was last week, maybe it was 2 weeks ago. Netanyahu sacked his, said he was sacking. It's still not clear whether it's going to happen. Said he was going to sack his defense minister after he had called on.
Yes, I am absolutely saying they are. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And I know that because they're still convinced, because they're morons, that whiteness means skin color when it means capitalism. So you can go in a timeout, and if you want to continue to be disruptive, then you'll get banned.
On Netanyahu to stop the judicial reforms. And this triggered an acceleration of the kind of demonstrations and occupations and strikes that we'd seen before. And so you had massive demonstrations, and both the Histadrut, which is Israel's trade union federation, and a historic institution of the Zionist movement, alongside with employers' organizations, announcing that they were shutting down the Israeli economy for a day. So the airport, Haifa port, supermarkets, schools, universities, etc., were on a mixture between strikes in some industries and actually employer lockouts in the others, because it's employers who sort of decided to shut it down, alongside very large kind of demonstrations, forced the Netanyahu government to announce that they would pause the reforms. They're very much paused, nothing has been pulled, and they are to be rediscussed after the parliamentary break that Israel is going in now. It seems that what will happen is that, on the one hand, Netanyahu will keep his coalition together long enough to pass their budget, which will allow the coalition to sort of stabilize its rule for the next 2 years, which they'll do, I think, if memory serves, in early June, after which the debate will restart over these reforms. And I think there's very little reason to think that, although there might be some changes, fundamentally any of the packages will be different. I think one intervening question is now how the Israeli government is going to react to the developments that Tawfiq started with, which are the responses both from Gaza and from Lebanon to the assaults on Al-Aqsa, as well as, I think, in terms of the Lebanese response, the increased military assaults of Israel in Syrian territory on Iranian targets. Nothing unites the Israeli public like a good military confrontation, and I certainly don't think we should write off the fact that the Netanyahu government.
Wow. Nothing unites the Israeli public like a good military confrontation. What isn't that prophetic?
The public like a good military confrontation, and I certainly don't think we should write off the fact that the Netanyahu government could see a real interest or advantage in responding extremely aggressively to the kind of developments that we are seeing now. I think it's also not for nothing that they're allowing the kind of challenges or provocations to take place inside of Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa. I think either way, this spells nothing good for Palestinians, and will certainly mean more assaults, more violence, more displacement, etc. And that raises an immediate question, I think, also for us in the national solidarity movement in terms of how we will respond in terms of putting pressure internationally on our own governments to put pressure on Israel and rein it in at a time where clearly it's feeling absolutely free of kind of international pressure and totally in total impunity in terms of kind of meting out its colonial violence against Palestinians. So I think that's something to bear in mind also in the discussion we'll have.
I just want to point out something very specific that he just said. He said that, like, essentially that Israel is exerting colonial violence on Palestinians. Okay? That's how they perceive it. Do I think the conflict could be engineered? I mean, my perspective on it is I think Israel knew what Hamas was planning and they let it happen because they wanted to be able to go in and level Gaza. It's a lot of seaside property right there. Gaza is a very, like, seaside property. Israel's been taking more Palestinian land for decades. Like, they keep, like Israel made here. Again, this is one of those things that, like, the right doesn't want to acknowledge. Israel never kept its commitment to stop taking Palestinian land. Palestine kept a lot of its commitments to Israel. Israel did not keep the commitment to stop taking their land. So do I think there's something to the fact that Israel had a vested interest in having some sort of pretext to go in and level Gaza? Maybe they were just tired of it. Maybe they just wanted it to be over. And as a pure coincidence, that's beautiful seaside property.
In terms of moving on, Tawfiq, I don't know if there's things that you wanted to react to in terms of what I said, and then also perhaps in terms of moving us to the next bit, whether there's things you'd want to say in terms of the sort of the international picture also of how this fits into the regional and global transformations that we're dealing with.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. I had a couple of things that I wanted to say here, just that might help fill out some of the pictures on different frontiers. So one thing I want to mention that I'm not sure if it really relates directly to what you were saying or not, but it's probably helpful for the audience to be aware of that this sort of second Israel, this the non-beautiful Israel, so to speak, is more linked to the settlement project, not just ideologically, but also like in its daily life. I don't know if folks remember around a dozen, maybe 10 years ago, it is very, very expensive around here. Tel Aviv was actually, like, last year or the year before, the most expensive city in the world, okay? So
isn't that interesting?
If you are from a quote unquote weaker or more a poorer section of Israeli society, the settlements are actually it's subsidized housing because they want to encourage people to go live in these houses that are in the middle of the West Bank. But that means, so these poorer sections of Israeli society are like, as I said, 120,000 in 1993, today it's 750,000. A lot, the demographics of that are not like your Ashkenazi, prosperous, not all Ashkenazi are prosperous, but like the fact of the matter is obviously that would be disproportionately the second Israel who was forced to live in the settlements. Bear in mind that about 2/3 of the settlers are actually just people who want cheaper housing. It's only 1/3 of the movement that's considered more harder ideological. But of course, with the harder ideology, in addition to the fact that, because they're living in a settlement and they have to go through checkpoints and Palestinians may be throwing rocks at them or shooting at them or whatnot, you have this sort of storm of, these sections basically seeing their interest and their lot behind this coalition that took over power. Okay, so that's just one side that might be just helpful to say. The second point I wanted to say is around the issue of kahana. Okay, I'm not sure, folks. Sai mentioned it, but it's really important. Before, in the past, there was no kahana is banned as a political party in Israel. Now, why is kahana banned in Israel? Is it because there's such a bunch of fascists? Well, yes, there are a bunch of fascists, but what differs kahana? Why is the kahana different from, let's say, there's a whole party in Israel that used to be called the Transfer Party. So it's like totally legitimate to organize your entire party around ethnic cleansing in Israel, as long as the ethnic cleansing is Palestinian. So, and that was a functioning party in the Israeli Knesset. It was a right.
All right. So again, I am not judging the accuracy of this. We are watching this to understand their perception. It may be true. It may not be true. The truth may be somewhere in the middle. He's just said that there was an entire party in Israel that was dedicated to the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. So if the far left has the insincere impression that there are political parties in Israel that are dedicated to ethnic cleansing, I mean, that says a lot. And again, I'm not judging the accuracy of it. I'm saying this is what they believe.
Party, okay, it was marginal to some extent, but like it was legitimate to be in parliament. What made Kahanism dangerous to the extent that the Israeli establishment needed to make them illegal in their participation in the Israeli political structure illegal, was that they saw secular Jews as more dangerous than just the Arabs and the Muslims or the Palestinians, so to speak. Why? Because secular Jews, the logic of secular Jews is that Jews become like everyone else, and that can't be acceptable in their. That's a big deviation, and goes totally against the idea of the chosen people and whatnot. The idea of equality. Now, I mean, it sounds a bit crazy for me to be saying this, but that is actually what they think, and it's not just what they think; it's what they do.
Secular Jew doesn't equal capitalist. They think that all Jews are capitalists. All Jews, not just secular Jews, all Jews.
They were banned because they started to attack secular Israelis, particularly those who were engaged in solidarity practices with Palestinians in the 80s, okay? It wasn't just that they were killing and massacring Palestinians if they had a chance. It's that they were attacking Israeli Jews. Okay, so that's a really important dimension. But this guy is the Minister of Security today. Okay, so it's not like when settlers are conducting a pogrom wherever. If you're a Palestinian, who do you call? You can't call the Palestinian Authority. It's not. They wouldn't have been here. They wouldn't dare to do it in a Palestinian Authority area. The settlers, they're scared. If you try to call the Israeli police, it's his people who are conducting the pogrom. So you understand how dramatic and dangerous it is. And by the way, Ben-Gvir, this Minister of Security, not only is he forming militias, the only reason he didn't pull out of the Israeli government when Netanyahu said, okay, we'll freeze the judicial reforms, is he said, okay, he got guarantees that he was able now to form militias. So legitimate militias, which is a very dangerous dynamic because he very much understands that.
Hang on. Fish addict, you've been here long enough to know what we're doing here. This is not about reality. This is not about your opinion. This is about understanding how they think and how they see the world. That is all that this is about. Your opinion on it doesn't matter. I'm sorry, that's just not what we're doing here.
The fight in the end will be on the ground. It's going to be us or them and that kind of logic. Bear in mind, this minister of security or whatever he was not even allowed to be in the Israeli army because he had, what's it called? Now I'm losing my words. Because he had terrorism convictions. He had terrorism convictions and he's been arraigned more than 50 times for the different sort of thuggish things that he's done against Palestinians, but also against quote unquote secular Israelis, okay? So bear that in mind. Third point to point out, around the Arab world and the normalization deals, okay? Here, it's important to bring into the picture, of course, the Arab Spring, quote unquote spring or Arab revolutionary process that started in 2011, and of course, the disaster of American imperial designs and interests in the Middle East and greater Middle East. Of course, the disaster of Afghanistan, Iraq, billions of dollars in Afghanistan. They empowered the Taliban, and now they had to recognize the Taliban, basically, and in a great defeat. And in Iraq, not only got rid of a contained Saddam Hussein and all that stuff, but basically gave over Iraq to Iran, like their biggest enemy. So,
did he advocate for the Taliban just then? Where did my closed captions go? I'm pretty sure he advocated for the Taliban just then. I just want to go back a little bit.
Things that he's done against Palestinians, but also against quote unquote secular Israelis, okay? So bear that in mind. Third point to point out, around the Arab world and the normalization deals, okay? Here, it's important to bring into the picture, of course, the Arab Spring, quote unquote spring or Arab revolutionary process that started in 2011, and of course, the disaster of American imperial designs and interests in the Middle East and greater Middle East. Of course, the disaster of Afghanistan, Iraq, billions of dollars in Afghanistan. They empowered the Taliban, and now they had to recognize the Taliban, basically, and in a great defeat. And
the reason I say I wonder if he's advocating for the Taliban is he's laughing about the fact that America lost to the Taliban and they had to recognize the Taliban in the great defeat, which he's not wrong. He's not wrong at all, but it's just, it was interesting to me how he said it. I was like...
And in Iraq, not only got rid of a contained Saddam Hussein and all that stuff, but basically gave over Iraq to Iran, like their biggest enemy. So basically, Iran was able to have territorial, realize much more broader territorial projection of power, okay? And so in a context where the Americans could not be now, today in 2023, go into a particular country and take out a government or take out a particular, I mean, maybe they might, but the point is, the crisis, people speak very openly about the fact that, well, firstly, the reactionary Arab regimes, particularly the monarchies of the Gulf, they were horrified that basically Obama didn't stop the Arab revolutionary process that was going on and basically allowed for these demonstrations to take place.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
These guys who are highly dependent upon America.
His perception is that Obama did not stop the Arab revolutionary process.
American power, basically, they needed a big brother to play their game, to have their back. And their big brother is the regional ally is Israel, who can play that game, okay? So the Americans, in the crisis of their imperial project in the Middle East after Afghanistan and Iraq, kind of are encouraging their collection of allies, the Gulf states.
Israel is, according to them, an American imperial project. Like the next step. I think that's what he just said. The next step in the American imperial project.
To kind of ally themselves with the Israelis, to make a group you guys together, and we'll help you contain the Iranian threat and the democratic threat, so to speak. So that also is an important part of the background. The final thing that I think needs to be said in this whole conversation is the crisis right now between the United States and Israel. Okay, it's not by, I mean, of course, in broad terms, there's a large alliance between the United States and Israel, and America's support of Israel is not contingent upon a particular government. You're talking about maybe upwards of $300 billion of dollars have been given to Israel by the United States since 1967. It's the aircraft carrier that can't be sunk, etc. All of a sudden, you've got this government coalition that's in power that, okay, firstly, Biden was the VP under Obama, who Obama wanted to reinstitutionalize this sort of liberal, internationalist, American imperial project, right? After the catastrophe of Iraq and Bushism, okay? Trump goes the other direction. Now Biden is back in power, but Netanyahu is back in power in Israel as well. So there is a problem here, okay? And Biden is not a fool. He's like an old school, whether you're a Cold War international liberalist or liberal internationalist imperialist. And he doesn't like the Netanyahu coalition. And there's reports from the Israeli press that like he tried to get rid of Netanyahu twice because he doesn't. The Zionist nationalist religious project is not the U.S. imperial project. And if you remember 2 years ago from here in Sheikh Jarrah, basically when the last time the things kicked off, basically the Biden administration came in and shut it down and was like, stop it. We are not here to defend ad infinitum your messianic religious nationalist vision, which means that we have to defend every settler who wants to kick out every Palestinian out of every house based on fake property claims. We're not here to do that. We're here to support Israel as a secure Jewish state and part of the Western Hemisphere, together with its allies in the region. And that's how they want to keep the architecture of U.S. influence and hegemony over the region. Because especially after the Arab Spring and all the historical dynamics, they can't keep everything down. It's like whack-a-mole for them. And the Arab world is getting stronger in its kind of, the democratic impulses are coming out, and there's large historical, political, economic factors that are making this whole situation explosive, and it means their imperial project is threatened from it. So somebody like Netanyahu and the bunch of folks behind him are a threat to America's larger interest in the region, because it doesn't align within the balance of powers of how America has been organized.
Isn't that interesting? The socialist view that America was threatened by like the more conservative hardline, like Netanyahu stuff.
The thing so far, and it's problematic, but we don't know where that's going to go. In fact, something very interesting. The real significant thing, what caused Netanyahu, it wasn't just the general strike that the Israelis had, but that the oppositionists in the Israeli camp had. It was the fact that the Israeli army began to show serious divisions. Okay, and this is the key. America has been sponsoring this army to be the dominant army in the Middle East. They're the aircraft carrier in the Middle East, and basically the elements of every section of the Israeli army, you were seeing divisions, including amongst the fighter. In fact, you didn't actually see divisions with the most. Why is Israel so dominant military? Not just because they have a bunch of Western arms, but the fact is they have aerial superiority. Okay, even when the Americans sell F-35s to the Emirates, they make sure that the technology on it is a little less good than what they give to the Israelis. It's called, what do they call it? They call it this dominant there's an abbreviation for it. Maybe Sai can help me out with that. Any case, they need to make sure that even with U.S. allies, the U.S. allies don't have as good technology as the Israelis do. So the fighter pilot class in Israel basically said, we're not going to, it was almost unanimous because they come from the Ashkenazi elite. They are brought up through the system, and they are the ones who are given the keys to these F-35s. And they didn't really have anything, they don't really see that second Israel as something that's part of them. And you see very clearly this division is very strong. So these elite fighter pilots are like, we don't want to be run by a dictatorship of Netanyahu and the right wing and blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's a problem for American imperialism, because it means the main thing that they've been sponsoring, the reliable, strong army, might not be an army anymore. It could lead to potential it might not be able to act if it needs to act. It might fight each other. And worse yet, it actually might lead to out-migration from Israel. And that is actually the likely scenario that we are about to see amongst Israeli society. I'll tell you a personal story of a friend who came to me to do a journalistic piece. She was from Portugal. She went to the Israeli Journalist Society here to get her journalist credentials, okay? The guy, of course, every journalist who comes to Israel who isn't backed by it doesn't come from like a major media organization or whatever that gets the automatic pass. It's kind of like their little censorship thing, right? Where like, what kind of things do you write? What do it's their way to vet people and to make them feel like, it's their soft censorship control of all that kind of stuff. Okay, so she gets called into the room with the head of the Journalist Association who holds the key whether she can actually get a journalist pass or not. The guy doesn't want to talk to her about what she wrote years ago about human rights or Palestine.
I mean, I think that this is a really fair point, Illustration Station. We're here from the socialists, we're hearing way more about economic issues than about religion. Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny? Because all we're hearing on like conservative Twitter right now is the Muslims hate the Jews. The Muslims just want to kill the Jews. This is an age-old religion conflict. Like, I think this is a land dispute. But when you're hearing the far left talk about it, they're not talking about religion at all. They're talking about the economic piece of it. That's a really interesting point.
Palestinians are batigh. He wants to ask, where is the best place to buy property in Portugal?
Because you're not listening. They think that all Jews are capitalist. All Jews, whether or not they're religious or secular Jews, all Jews are capitalist. You're still wrong. That's what, and you keep being wrong because you keep not listening, and that's why you're getting spanked.
Because because all those guys who sit at the tops of those things are actually are thinking about using their Western passports and having a backup plan. So Israel, the U.S. is now trying.
Do you think that socialists are unaware of religion? I don't think socialists are unaware of religion. It's just not what it's not what they care about. Contrary to popular belief, it's just not what they care about.
Trying to find a way to solve this thing, and it's not really sure how it's going to play out. Right now, it's just been stalled. So I'll leave it there. Sorry, that was a lot of feedback commentary. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Tawfiq. I think we're going to want to move to questions quite quickly. I mean, just to add to that, I think I agree really with what you're saying. I think, undoubtedly the kind of mobilization of the elite in the army, and again the kind of the division that you talk about between the kind of the beautiful Israel and the second Israel plays itself out in the army, and so it's the kind of the most elite sections of the army joining. There is a kind of a striking reality, of course, that the planes continue to be able to strike
Nope, this is a right-wing talking point. This is not a left-wing talking point. Socialists do not care about religion. There is no point in which socialists ever talk about ridding the world of religion. It doesn't happen. They don't talk about it. They don't write books about it. They don't lecture about it. They don't give classes about it. I've looked for this. They don't talk about it. It is a non-factor in their decision-making process. They never bring it up. They don't talk about how much they like some religions and hate others. They don't talk about how are we going to get religion out of the world. They don't talk about any of this. This is a right-wing talking point, not a left-wing talking point. Roslyn, thank you for the super chat. Hi, Carlin. I'm sorry to hear about your knitting situation. It's disappointing after you have followed him and his work for so long. I agree with you, Roslyn. I am extremely disappointed by the whole affair, but everything happens for a reason. Got to keep going on. I've got some ideas for how to handle it, but right now we're just rolling with it. But I do appreciate the super chat. Thank you.
Syria on a kind of regular on a regular and kind of increasing speed, so that also there's sometimes, I think, perhaps a danger to sort of overestimate certainly the immediate kind of crisis that they might be facing. The only thing I wanted to add before we open up is I think the tension with the US runs both ways, and so that what's happening in the region in general and in the kind of growing confidence, I think, of the Israeli state.
Fish addict. I am not going to say this again, and if you keep whining about not getting an answer that you like, I'm going to time you out, and I'm no longer fucking around. You are not making the same point. Insofar as the capitalism thing, they do not distinguish. There is no indication to me that they distinguish between the two. You're distinguishing between the two. I don't know why you're doing it, but you like to go down these roads that have nothing to do with what's actually being talked about. They do not distinguish. Thus, you are not making the same point that they are in any way. I don't know what the confusion is. I don't know why you keep talking about this. It makes no sense.
States' assault on Palestinians is also the broad kind of transformation of the US's main focus, US imperialism's main focus towards the Pacific, towards China, towards containment there. And that increases its dependence on its kind of allies in the region. And so the normalization deals are partly that. They're partly an internal process, but they're, of course, an external process that's encouraged very much by the American state to get its closest allies to run the region for it, let's say. But that also increases the kind of independence and the autonomy that these actors have in lots of ways. And so on the one hand, they start making deals with people that perhaps they shouldn't be making deals with, right? So you start seeing kind of close allies making deals with the Chinese or the Russians, etc., at the time of heightened crisis. But I also think it means that the US has lessened, and I mean lessened and not that it has lost that ability, but the lessened ability to keep its allies on the leash. And so, that you can see that with the Saudis, whether they kill journalists in other people's capitals or whether they make decisions on cutting the amount of oil that gets released against the kind of direct demands of Washington. But I think also with Israel, that Israel feels a much greater ability to act independently or in direct kind of opposition to the demands of Washington, and that there is a diminished ability of Washington to immediately call back its allies and to demand that they fall into line. And that's, I think, it's a dangerous situation to be in, because there is an alignment of a number of kind of internal and external processes that I think are really kind of restraining the kind of the worst elements of the Israeli colonial project. And then the other thing is that Israel is obviously important in lots of different ways, in trade, etc. But one striking example is this setting up of the new, what is it, 2I, 2U, or 2U, 2I, or the forum between Israel, India, the UAE, and the US. that signed these kind of large agreements to respond to the Ukraine war as well. And so to use the corridor between India, the UAE, and Israel to have a sort of an exchange between agricultural output in India, technology from Israel, and trade infrastructure from the UAE to accelerate the ability to pull foodstuffs and agricultural output out of India in order to start replacing the kind of the crisis generated by the war in Ukraine. And so there's a whole number of kind of international changes, both on the long and the short term, that I think are really giving Israel a greater amount of leverage in that relationship, and that I think partly explain the kind of the increased assaults. And then maybe we can take some questions now. I can see that Brechna is getting ready to intervene.
Yes,
Hang on.
Sai,
Before they move into questions, which is always the most illuminating part, Rottweiler, thank you for the super chat. Getting rid of religion was mostly a point of the new atheism movement. Sure, there's big overlap with Marxists, but Marxist dictators like Pol Pot went after religion for different reasons. I mean, like, my point is, like, it's just like it's a non-issue for them. It's something that it's like religion doesn't even enter into their consciousness. It doesn't even enter into like their, maybe they think they've already defeated religion. Like the only time I hear them mention religion is when they talk about conservative Christians as a political organizing force. But they don't talk about like we need to cure these conservative Christians of their religion and ban their religion, and now they don't talk about that at all. It doesn't even, they focus on it as a political group rather than anything to have to do with religion at all.
Tawfiq, thank you so much for this incredibly illuminating conversation. So I'll just remind our audience that you can post your questions in the chat, and if we have time, we'll definitely come to them. I had a question for you both on some of the things that you touched upon. So Tawfiq, you discussed the role of the Oslo Accords and how the architecture of the Accords frame what is happening today. You also discussed this illusion of the peace process, which helped cloak
The illusion
Israel's
of the peace process.
settler colonialism as it globalized. My question, and I'm sure it's one that a lot of people are thinking about at the moment, is what role is the PA playing at this point? How do we grapple with the lack of credibility of the PA today? And where do we see this heading as Palestinian resistance continues and intensifies across Palestine? I wondered if you could specifically also speak to the focus on Palestinians defying their fragmentation across Palestine. So for example, last year's Palestine-wide strike was very inspiring to watch from afar. And I wondered if you could say what the long-term impacts were of that action.
So I guess, quickly to answer that.
There was a Palestine-wide strike.
I think there's a lot been said around the PA. Certainly in English, the English language sort of the Palestinian Authority was actually a project of Israel and the international community. Okay, it's important to say that. It's a creation of them. It's been funded by them every year. Every time the Palestinian Authority has been in fear of collapsing, the Americans come in and save it, okay? Because they want to save it, because they understand to save the PA is the way to save Israel from that Jewish democratic contradiction that I said before. Now, the PA is the frontier where the Palestinian movement formally meets the Israeli settler colonial project formally, okay? Really what it is the Fatah movement animating and embodying and dominating this institutional infrastructure and attempting to create a monopoly over its political and financial inputs, so to be able to preserve its historical role, to preserve itself as a movement, but at the same time not to, how to put this, not, of course, there, even if there was no PA, there would be a PA. Okay, the question, in the sense that there will always be a frontier. There will always be a frontier where the Palestinian national movement needs to meet the Israelis. Okay, the Americans understood that the best way that this could be managed is to try and embolden one section, the least radical section of the Palestinian movement, and to make the problem of Israel.
Have Palestinians have Palestinians traditionally like operated as collectivists? Does anyone know? Because I mean, have they traditionally operated a society more grounded in individualism and meritocracy, or have they operated a society grounded in collectivism? I truly don't know the answer to this. Anyway, let me know if anyone has any insight. Yeah, see, this is kind of what I thought, Kurt. Arabs are very much traders and individuals.
Internal Palestinian problem and trying to displace that into internal Palestinian political conflicts and class conflicts, basically. Fatah does not see itself as needing to confront Israel. It sees itself as needing
well,
to...
hang on. Now we're getting two different things. Iris says, yes, I think I don't agree with this, Iris. I don't agree with this. Yeah, they're tribal. They have an emphasis on family. Islam is not as individualist, but it's not inherently socialist. Okay, so apparently we don't know the answer to this. We're getting the answers are all over the place in the chat, so you guys can fight amongst yourselves and figure it out.
Hold down the fort, keep a singular Palestinian flag that at least keep the Palestinian project aligned, or organized and self-identifying as Palestinians with the main set of rights that it's claiming for the last 70 years, but not to directly confront Israel in any sort of confrontation fashion, particularly one that's military, because it understands that the problem is an Israeli problem. Israel has a problem because what do I mean by that? Because Israel's problem is not with Fatah or Hamas or whatever. Israel's problem is that there are still 6 or 7 million Palestinians between the river and the sea. It's not that
there it
Fatah
is.
is corrupt or there's an Islamist.
What did he just say? Israel's problem is not with Hamas. Israel's problem, and this is the socialist perspective, I'm repeating this, Israel's problem is not with Hamas. Israel's problem is with the 6 million Palestinians between them and the sea, or something like that. I'm not asking about all the different tribes. I'm just asking, are they generally more interested in individualism and meritocracy, or are they generally more collectivist? I don't know the answer to this, but I'm not asking for the different schisms between the different tribes. I'm asking for a very kind of generalized, do they believe in capitalism, or are they fucking socialists?
Particularly one that's military. Because it understands that the problem is an Israeli problem. Israel has a problem because what do I mean by that? Because Israel's problem is not with Fatah or Hamas or whatever. Israel's problem is that there are still 6 or 7 million Palestinians between the river and the sea. It's not that
the land.
because Fatah is corrupt or there's an
He's
Islamist.
saying they want the land.
Palestinians are too Islamist or radical or socialist or liberal or whatever. Their problem is that they're not Jews and they're still Palestinians claiming to be Palestinians on Palestinian land, and by itself, just by that very primitive objective reality, they can neutralize the Israeli project, the Zionist project, okay? So why confront the Israelis? Fatah's project is basically to keep the Palestinian project alive as much as possible. We don't need to fight anybody directly about it. We already paid the price of armed struggle. We got recognition. We got primitive statehood recognitions. And now Europe, America, you figure out your problem with Israel, okay? You figure out your problem with the 7 million people, Palestinians. You figure out your problem now that Israel is fighting amongst itself, because basically the settler communities of settlers who are part of that project can't figure out who's going to dominate the state and who gets to milk it most. Basically, that's the problem. You know that because they use the state of it, this incredible infrastructure that they took over basically and established through the American money, and also by taking over Palestine.
I want to point out this chat from Elena. It feels strange how we know about how Jewish people live, but not the Palestinians. I think there's a reason for that. Isn't it strange that when I ask generally, are these people more individual or are they more collectivist? I don't believe any of you know what you're talking about. Like honestly, and I'm not, and I include myself in this, but none of you know what you're talking about either, because the answers in the chat are all over the place.
Palestine was, they were distributing it amongst themselves basically, and there's big fights amongst them as to what the identity of that project is and who's going to get what part of the pie.
Philosophist, I don't agree that it's hard to draw a comparison. You can draw a comparison with anything. The reason that it's hard for us to draw a comparison is we don't know. We just don't know.
So Fatah wants to sit back on this, maintain a space where eventually they believe, through the numbers, through the problems on the other side, through the problems that could be generated between them and the West, that eventually they can make slow incremental gains in a passive manner. So it's a weird thing to say, but that is really what they're trying to do. Now, that is something totally uninspiring. It has big part of it is obviously corruption and trying to be monopolistic over the, undemocratic and dominate the economic and political opportunities of the whole situation. So there's nothing inspirational about it. And in fact, the Fatah has all been about trying to get rid of anything that's supposedly threatening, because they want to keep the address of Palestine alive. Okay, so I'm not trying to be apologetic for them. I think folks in the West need to understand what they are. And they are not the enemy in this situation. Okay, they hold back from a struggle that could be much more. And obviously we want a leadership that's representative, that empowers, that's bottom up, that etc. That's not what they are. We do need to understand, but we just need to understand them. So I don't know. So where are they heading? This is an important question. You know where they're heading. Abu Mazen is 86 years old. The Israelis in the particularly this right wing. I will show you, I'm not going to show you now, but I got a thing on my WhatsApp the other day, yesterday, okay? This right wing, these dudes, the national religious folks, they want to turn the clock back. They don't even recognize the Palestinians, okay? They're living in another world, okay? They're like, there's no such thing as Palestinians. The Minister of Interior, what's his name? Smotrich, basically.
The reason I paused and my eyes got really big is pretty much the number one talking point that I've been hearing from conservatives is there is no such thing as Palestinians. What did he just say? 6 months ago, this political party, according to socialists, so we always have to take it with a grain of salt, but, these two don't seem like the average kind of cultural Marxists that we encounter. These two actually kind of seem like they might be far left, but they kind of like they're in the weeds on like they're more in the weeds on like the development of this society, I think. So I'm giving them just a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt, but the reason I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt in this case is that he literally just said a right-wing talking point, which is that the national like the this ultra conservative thing that's going on in Israel, whatever that is, basically it has been running around saying there's no such thing as Palestinians. I've been hearing the same thing from conservatives for days. Let's listen again.
Okay. Yesterday, okay, this right wing, these dudes, the national religious folks, they want to turn the clock back. They don't even recognize the Palestinians. Okay, they're living in another world. Okay, they're like, there's no such thing as Palestinians. The Minister of Interior, what's his name, Smotrich, basically went to France and said, there's no such thing as Palestinians. It's just a bunch of invention. He pulls the clock back 50, 60 years when Golda Meir said the exact same thing. They're basically just a bunch of kind of tribes. And the best way to deal with tribes is kind of like, sticks and carrots, basically, and give the biggest tribes a bunch of carrots and then give them also a bunch of clubs to club the smaller tribes.
So can people understand, like, regardless of what side you're on in this conflict, can people understand how, an entire group of millions of people might be just a little bit offended and a little bit pissed off if the politicians on the faction that are literally keeping them in an open air prison that they can't leave without permission, supplying their food, supplying their water, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Can anyone understand why this group of people might be a little bit pissed off at the people saying, you don't even exist? Why would you think that a high birth rate would mean they're collectivist? I don't think that has anything to do with it. In fact, I would say that adds more to individualism instead of collectivism.
So the guy, this Likudnik, basically, is basically saying we should establish the Palestinian Emirates of the West Bank. And he literally went through every single city. He said in Ramallah, you've got the Tawil family, the Abu Ain family, and the Barghouti family. They're going to be the ones who are running Ramallah. In Nablus, you got these elite. They're totally in denial of the fact that there's something called Palestinian nationalism, that Palestinian national movement, that it's made all these important gains. They want to reverse this clock and establish what was originally a plan known as the village leagues. And the Americans tried it also in Iraq with the Sahwa and all this stuff. You basically get, it's such an Orientalist, colonialist mentality, but it's backward. So where is it leading today? It's leading today where they're basically, once Abu Mazen goes, because Abu Mazen is too powerful, has too much, is too clever, by the way, to, he doesn't want to, he says all the right things, anti-terror, blah, 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 I just want peace, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But eventually this guy's going to go. I mean, because whatever, this will be their opportunity. They consider potentially both to reverse the Oslo Accords and go back to some sort of United Emirates of the Palestinian,
Okay. Well, I'm going to think about that in a second. James Jones, thank you for the super chat. From women in the Arab world, unlike the extreme individualism we see in North America, every person for himself, individual rights, Arab society emphasizes the importance of the group. Okay. I mean, I think this is important. And I appreciate you looking that up. That gives a little bit more clarity. I just wonder if that's specific to Palestinians specifically. But I appreciate the super chat, and it does actually make more sense to me that they would maybe be more collectivist, just from like a practical, again, like they're grounding their society around religious values. So not collectivist so much in terms of like communists, but in terms of like mutual agreement to adhere to like this set of values. I appreciate you looking that up for us.
and take over the rest of the land and annex all the lands other than the major cities, okay? And so what they've been doing, by the way, with the Americans, okay, is working carefully, because this massive infrastructure that they established through Oslo behind the security thing, 500 checkpoints throughout the West Bank, right?
500 checkpoints.
System of levers.
That's crazy.
You can open and close each city and blackmail people at 500 different points to move a box of tomatoes from one town to another. You can basically blackmail Palestinians around it, you know, and that means you can have the opportunity to, you know, to create elites, to make people and break people, right? So what they're working to do is basically, they don't like that. The right particularly doesn't like the idea of a centralized Palestinian project. The Americans and the original Israelis who designed Oslo said, no, we need a centralized thing, because that way we get off our back the problem of the Palestinians as a problem, and we put it all on their plate. And plus, when something like Corona happens, like it's much easier to deal with one Ministry of Health than 500 villages by yourself through the civil administration, which is the alternative. And they prefer not to. So, but basically they're aiming to try and break up even further, basically the unified currently political leadership of the Palestinians, because the PA is still an American project, but beneath it is Fatah, and they don't like the fact that Fatah is clever enough to keep the fort at least alive as a unified project, okay? And that's not giving any political support to it, but it's also saying that it's tactical enough.
Iris, this is not what we're doing here today. This is not what we're doing.
It doesn't want to allow the fragmentation.
We are not spreading propaganda here today.
The way the Americans and the Israelis want to. So basically, the Americans and the Israelis are trying to set up a situation where between elite families and security elites, they can further rule the West Bank by making bilateral deals with the big families in the north, the big families in the south, the big families in thing, and then when they need to come and clobber whoever doesn't like that project, whether it's Gaza or anybody else in the West Bank. So I think that's how folks need to understand the PA. But truth be told, talking to a Western audience like this, I think folks keep that inside, kind of understand it in that complicated, contradictory way. But the real focus needs to be on the Israelis and Western support for Israel, and the abomination of this project that is going on, that is promising rivers and tsunamis of blood coming up unless it's stopped. So,
thank you, Tawfiq. That's really helpful. Tawfiq, you also spoke about the animation of a national religious dynamic within Israel over the years, which of course we can see manifesting today in the character of the Israeli government. And Sai, you spoke very clearly about the intensifying social tensions within Israel, taking the form of these so-called pro-democracy protests to protect the Israeli Supreme Court, which of course, as we know, and as Mohammed El-Kurd covers very clearly in a recent article for The Nation, is a settler-serving institution at the end of the day as well. I think you pointed out that, very helpfully, that both sides of the divide have a deep commitment to the Zionist movement. So given that we're not actually seeing a progressive movement whatsoever within Israel, I have the same question. Where is this going to go? And more importantly, what do we want to see the international solidarity movement rally around?
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, where is it going to go? I think is difficult to answer. I have to say that for quite a long time, I've been very skeptical of the fact that anybody in the Israeli political sphere has a serious alternative to, I don't know what we want to call it, Netanyahuism or something. I think he's the only one with a consistent political project and a consistent political bloc. The problem he has is that he doesn't have a big enough majority in Israeli, a stable enough majority in Israeli society. So for the last 6 years, no, the last end of 2018, so the last 3 and a bit, I can't count anymore, 5 and a bit years, there's been 6 different governments in Israel, all unable to maintain their coalition for long enough to not have to call a new election. What's happening in that process is that on the one hand, you have Netanyahu and the right, and a very stable Likud that is building different alliances around itself. And you have everybody else in what is an increasingly kind of rapidly transforming sea of parties that change their names all the time. The alliances change, who can run with who changes, and total instability. And I think it points to the fact that nobody has a real alternative to this kind of long-term alliance that the Israeli right has built between, on the one hand, big Israeli capital that has these increasingly kind of international aims, and the settler movement that is keeping the colonial movement effective, expanding, and active. And that really is the sort of historical block, I think, at the center of Israeli politics that nobody has a very serious alternative to. So will the movement manage to stop the reforms, to alter them, etc.? Perhaps. I have to say I remain unconvinced in that it will manage to roll them back entirely. But maybe I'm wrong. But I think in the long term, it's very unlikely. Either way, and like you've said, and what I was kind of trying to point to before is that neither of these camps represents either.
Is it possible? And I'm truly asking this question. I don't know the answer to this. Is it what I'm kind of hearing from this perspective is that they viewed weaknesses within like the Israeli political system in terms of like factionalism, infighting, not being able to like, hold a faction of people long enough to be able to do anything. Is it possible that the reason that this happened now is that the Palestinians viewed kind of like the same weakness? And we could also, by the way, kind of supplement that by reminding people that Israel, well, I think they knew this was coming, but they allege that they had a massive intelligence failure that led to them completely missing what was going on. So that to me would point to weaknesses of some sort in the government, and maybe that was perceived on this. I don't know. It's just conjecture. I'm just making that up, but that's kind of like what they keep saying is like there's all this infighting, there's factionalism, they can't come together. If you were being kind of like jailed in an open air prison by a people that you perceive to have some sort of weakness, wouldn't that be good timing?
Real democracy, i.e. democratic civil and political rights for everybody that lives in the territory between the river and the sea, or a break with the Israeli colonial process. So where can the changes come from?
I didn't know that. That's
I think that the Palestinian left historically talked about the fact that the role of Zionism was its alliance with Western imperialism, and so that the transformation of that needed to be a transformation that would be regional and that would challenge fundamentally the bases of Western imperialism. Actually, I think that hasn't really changed. What does that mean practically? I think practically that means that there are 3 locuses of resistance. I think one of them we saw, and Tawfiq talked about it, in the kind of 2011 revolutions, the popular movements in the region that have very much been repressed, but that fought for kind of democratic, political, economic transformation of the region, which would fundamentally put Israel in a very different position as it would American imperialism by weakening it. The second one is, of course, or perhaps that's the first one, is the Palestinian struggle for national liberation. And that's not a struggle that's in a position of strength, but it is certainly one that for the last decade has seen really important qualitative transformations. You mentioned the general strike we saw 2 years ago now, and the kind of mobilization across historic Palestine. The Great March of Return in Gaza a few years back might be another example of that. The very broad social movements against the Salam Fayyad government around the time of the Arab revolutions. There are other examples. In fact, the breakdown of the ability of the PA to maintain its kind of dominance, its security dominance in the West Bank for the moment, and these kind of development of new resistance group we're seeing, all of those, I think, are signs of a collapsing of a particular kind of imposed control from above on the Palestinian struggle, and the fact that from below there are lots of different initiatives that are trying to develop new models, new forms of struggle, independent from the kind of Oslo institutions that are collapsing all around them. That is not to kind of be, rosy-eyed about it and saying that there's a kind of an immediate new solution that will emerge out of them, but I do think they're qualitatively incredibly important, and that they point to the kind of new abilities of Palestinians to develop alliances and resistance to Israel's colonial project, and that the solidarity movement should do, I think, a much better job in highlighting, building solidarity with, connecting with, having those people speak, publishing them, inviting them, etc., etc., etc. And then, the most obvious, but I think it remains true, is that in 2005, 170 Palestinian civil society organizations made a call to the civil societies of the world, demanding that they boycott, divest, and sanction governments, institutions, and companies that participate in and profit from the continued colonization of Palestine. And people should participate in that, in their neighborhoods, in their workplaces, in their universities, in their schools, etc. All institutional links with governments, institutions, or companies that participate in or profit from the Israeli colonial project, all those links should be broken. That's a difficult struggle. It's one that many people are involved in, and it's one that I think we should continue and intensify. And for us, I think that's the most important thing to do, both to increase the pressure from our own governments on Israel, increase the pressure on our own governments to break their links with Israel, and to give as much space as possible for the movements in the region and in Palestine to develop in opposition to Israel's continued colonial project.
Thank you, Sai. I think, unfortunately, we'll need to wrap up there.
Got it.
So, Sai and Tawfiq.
I guess so. Well, guys, I'm going to be honest. I wish they had focused more time in that presentation talking about specifically Palestine and how Palestine sees things and the Palestinian struggle for liberation, as they would put it, and et cetera, et cetera. But I do think the perspective was interesting in terms of their perceived factional infighting in Israel, how they perceive the U.S. to be basically using Israel to support the imperial colonial project. I would like to delve into the idea of decolonization later this week, probably tomorrow even, to just understand a little bit more about that. But I thought it was interesting to get that perspective. I will say that maybe I'm giving them too much credit, and maybe I'm just really used to the cultural Marxism stuff at this point, but these two individuals did seem to have a little bit more credibility so far as I'm concerned. I don't know, because it's usually with socialism, we're focusing on more kind of the subjective side of things. And of course, this is subjective. They're going to have their perspective about what happened, what didn't, what things they're putting in, what things they're taking out. It just, to me, seemed like they really dug into the details and the nuances a little bit more. And again, this is a far left perspective. These are Marxists. These are literal Marxists. And so I don't want us to lose sight of that. But I did think their perspective aligned with why we're seeing what we're seeing happen. So I thought it was worthwhile, and I appreciate you guys hanging in. Now, as a reminder, because this is Tuesday, this is not my last stream of the day. It is but my first stream of the day, and I'm going to go take a break for a couple hours, and then I'm going to be coming back at 9:30 tonight, and we're going to do a very, what I suspect will be very eventful edition of Nothing Remotely Controversial with Joshua and I. We talk about news. Joshua is a psychic. I mean, I don't know, man. Like, I don't want too many. Can people please ask happy questions tonight? Yeah, we're gonna talk about like the sad stuff and like the depressing stuff, but can people please talk about like some happy stuff tonight? Can you guys just be thinking about that in terms of like, can we ask some uplifting questions too? The world is going to hell in a handbasket. Like, we're about to enter World War III if we're not already in World War III. Can we just have some fun tonight? That's going to be on at 9:30 in a couple hours, guys. I will see you then. Take care. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you soon. Bye.